3.
I have reviewed the previous driver's DVIR. The general appearance of the vehicle is in good condition. The vehicle is not leaning to one side or the other. There are no fluid leaks under the vehicle. Clearance lights, headlights, and corner indicator lights are clean, clear, and unbroken. The mirror brackets are properly mounted and secure, not damaged or broken. License plate and HUT sticker clean, current, and up to date. Now, Pennsylvania students, we're going to go to the passenger side of the engine. New York students would skip to the driver's side engine. The wiper arm has the proper spring tension and the blade is in good condition. The radiator hoses have no abrasions, bulges, or cuts, and they're not leaking. The radiator is properly mounted and secure, not damaged or leaking. The alternator is properly mounted and secure, and it's belt driven, and the belt can have no more than 3/4 of an inch free play. The side light, clean, clear, and unbroken. The mirror, properly mounted and secure, not damaged or broken. The door opens and closes properly. The door hinges are in good condition, and the door seal is in good condition. And there's 3 handles. The steps, properly mounted and secure. The fuel tank, properly mounted and secure, not damaged, not leaking, and the cap is secure. IFTA sticker, clean, current, and up to date. The exhaust is properly mounted and secured, and there's no black soot, which would indicate a leak. Now to the driver's side. The wiper arm has a proper spring tension. The blade is in good condition. All of the air hoses and other hoses have no abrasions, bulges, or cuts. They're not damaged, they're not leaking. In the back of the engine, we have our power steering pump and air compressor. They're properly mounted and secured, and they're both gear driven. For New York students, the alternator is located on the other side of the engine, and it is belt driven. The oil dipstick is here to check your oil. You would pull it out, wipe it clean with a cloth, reinsert it, pull it out, and check your level. If you needed to add oil, you would add it to the cap, and the cap is secure. The water pump is properly mounted and secured, not damaged or leaking. It is belt driven, and the belt has no more than 3/4 of an inch play. Our coolant reservoir, properly mounted and secure, not damaged or leaking, filled to the proper operating level. Both caps are tight. All the hoses going to and from have no abrasions, bulges, or cuts, not damaged or leaking. The power steering reservoir is properly mounted and secure, not damaged or leaking, filled to the proper operating range. Both caps are secure. All hoses going to and from have no abrasions, bulges, or cuts, not damaged or leaking. The steering shaft is properly mounted and secure with 2 serviceable U-joints, and it can have no more than 10 degrees play. The steering gearbox is properly mounted and secure with the proper hardware. It's not damaged or leaking, and all the hoses going to and from have no abrasions, bulges, or cuts, not damaged or leaking. The steering linkage, arms, and rods are not worn or cracked. The joints and sockets are properly mounted and secured with the proper hardware. The suspension. The shock tower is properly mounted and secured with the proper hardware, and it's not damaged and it's not leaking. The leaf spring hangers, which you can see, there's one right there, and there's one in the back. They hold up the leaf springs. The leaf spring hangers Both mounts are properly mounted and secured with the proper hardware. They're not damaged or broken. The leaf springs are not missing, shifted, cracked, or broken. And they're properly mounted and secured with 2 U-bolts, 4 lock nuts, and 4 flat washers. Now on to the brakes. The brake air hose is properly mounted and secured on both ends. There's no abrasions, bulges, or cuts, not damaged or leaking. The ABS wire, which runs right with the air hose, is properly mounted and secure on both ends. The brake chamber is properly mounted and secured. It's not dent, damaged, or leaking. The push rod is properly mounted and secured to the slack adjuster with the proper hardware. The slack adjuster can have no more than 1 inch of free play by hand when the brakes are disengaged. The brake drum, which is inside here, is properly mounted and secure, not cracked, broken, or damaged, has no grease, oil, or debris. The brake linings are properly mounted and secure, not cracked or damaged. The linings are not wore dangerously thin. The steer tires, the sidewalls, have no abrasions, bulges, or cuts. The tread is wore evenly, and steer tires must have a minimum of 4/32 tread depth, and they cannot be a recap. My rim is not bent, cracked, or damaged. No illegal welds or aftermarket holes. My lug nuts are properly mounted and secure. There's no shiny thread or rust trails, which would indicate a loose lug, and they were properly torqued with a wrench before we left the yard. My hub seal is properly mounted and secured with the proper hardware, not damaged or leaking, and it's filled to the proper operating level. My valve stem is properly centered in the hole, has a metal cap, and the air pressure was checked with a tire pressure gauge before we left the yard to the proper manufacturer's specification. Our side light clean, clear, unbroken. Our mirror is properly mounted and secured, not damaged or broken. Our door handle and latch are working properly. The door hinge is in good condition, and the door seal is present. I have my 3 handholds. The battery box. The battery box is properly mounted and secure. The connections are tight. There is no corrosion around the terminals. All batteries have the proper caps. Steps properly mounted and secure. Fuel tank properly mounted and secure, not damaged or leaking, and the cap is secure. IFTA sticker, clean, current, and up to date. The rear of the tractor, there's no bumps, bulges, or holes, and it has the proper DOT reflective tape at the top. The air lines has no abrasions, bulges, or cuts. They're not damaged and they're not leaking. Air lines are properly mounted and secured with glad hands. The electrical lines have no cuts and are not chafed or worn. They are not tangled and they're not dragging on the catwalk. The catwalk is properly mounted and secured to the frame, and it is free of objects. New York students, the exhaust is properly mounted and secured, and there's no black soot which would indicate a leak. The drive shaft, which is kind of hard to see under there, is not bent or cracked. The couplings are secure and free of foreign objects. The frame, not cracked or damaged, free of illegal welds and holes. The torque bar, which is hidden under the secondary catwalk, so you can't see it on this truck, is not bent, cracked, or damaged, secured on both ends. The mud flap is properly mounted and secured, not damaged. The clearance lights on the trailer at the top, they're clean, clear, and unbroken. The headboard inside of trailer have no bumps, bulges, or holes. They're free of damage and they're strong enough to contain cargo. The trailer has at least 50% of DOT reflective tape down the side of the trailer. The fifth wheel skid plate, which is this plate right underneath the trailer. The fifth wheel skid plate is properly greased and not damaged. The fifth wheel itself, there is no daylight between the fifth wheel and the skid plate. The handle is in the locked position. I will check to see if the locking jaws are secured around the kingpin when I check my lights. The fifth wheel is properly mounted to the frame with the proper hardware. And again, the frame has no bends, cracks, or illegal welds or holes. The shock tower, which is behind the dual there, the shock tower is properly mounted and secured and is not damaged or leaking. The airbag is properly mounted and secured. There's no abrasions, bulges, or cuts. It's not damaged or leaking. The control arm hanger is properly mounted and secured to the frame, not bent, cracked, or damaged. And the control arm itself is not cracked or damaged, properly secured on both ends, secured to the frame with 2 U-bolts, 4 lock nuts, and 4 flat washers. The rear of the tractor brakes, the brake air hose, properly mounted and secured on both ends. No abrasions, bulges, or cuts, not damaged or leaking. The ABS wire, properly mounted and secure. The brake chamber, properly mounted and secure. Not dent, damaged, or leaking. The push rod is properly mounted and secured to the slack adjuster with the proper hardware. The slack adjuster can have no more than 1 inch of free play by hand when the brakes are disengaged. The brake drum is properly mounted and secure, not cracked, broken, or damaged, has no grease, oil, or debris. The brake linings are properly mounted and secured, not cracked or damaged, and not wore dangerously thin. The inner and the outer sidewalls of the tires have no abrasions, bulges, or cuts. The tread is wore evenly. There's no debris between the duals. I have the proper bud spacing. And my tread must have a minimum of 2 30-second tread depth, and they can be a recap. My rims have no aftermarket holes or illegal welds. My lugs are properly mounted and secure. There's no rust trails or shiny thread, which would indicate a loose lug. My hub seal is properly mounted and secure with the proper hardware, filled to the proper operating level, not damaged or leaking. My valve stems are properly centered in the hole with metal caps, and my tire pressure was checked with a gauge before we left the yard. My mud flap is properly mounted and secured, and it has the proper DOT reflective tape. My locking jaws are secured around my kingpin. My lights in the back, my reverse light, and my tail lights are clean, clear, and unbroken. Also my license plate light. My landing gear is properly mounted and secured to the trailer with the proper hardware. The feet are in the raised position. There's no debris around the feet. The handle is in the stowed position. My trailer has the proper cross members. None are missing or damaged, and the floor is in good condition. My side light, clean, clear, and unbroken. My brake air lines, which you can see there. They're at least 18 inches off the ground. There's no abrasions, bulges, or cuts, not damaged or leaking. We have our sliding fifth wheel, which is in the locked position. There's 4 pins total, 2 on each side, and they're all out, which is in the locked position. The handle is in the in position, which indicates that it is locked. My leaf spring mount is properly mounted and secured. My leaf springs not cracked, damaged, missing, or shifted. And my trailing arm is properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or damaged. My brake air hoses have no abrasions, bulges, or cuts, not damaged or leaking. My ABS wire is properly mounted and secure. The brake chamber is properly mounted and secure, not dent, damaged, or leaking. The push rod properly mounted and secured to the slack adjusters with the proper hardware. The slack adjusters can have no more than 1 inch of free play by hand when the brakes are disengaged. The brake drum is properly mounted and secure, not cracked, broken, or damaged, has no grease, oil, and debris. My brake lining is properly mounted and secure, not cracked or damaged, and not wore dangerously thin. And to the tires again. My tire sidewalls, no abrasions, bulges, or cuts. My tread is wore evenly. There's no debris between the duals. I have the proper bud spacing, and I have at least 2 30-seconds tread depth, and they can be a recap. My rim is in good condition. There's no illegal welds or aftermarket holes. My lugs are all secure. There's no shiny threads or rust trails, which would indicate a loose lug. They were properly torqued with a wrench before we left the yard. My hub seal is properly mounted and secure with the proper hardware. It's not damaged or leaking, and it's filled to the proper operating level. My valve stems are properly centered in the hole with metal caps, and the tire pressure was checked with a gauge before we left the yard. Mud flap properly mounted and secure. My ABS light is clean, clear, and unbroken. We'll test the functionality on the in-cab inspection. Marker light, clean, clear, and unbroken. Our clearance lights and our tail lights are clean, clear, and unbroken. Our door is in good condition. It's properly mounted and secured with the proper hinges and hardware. And the handle is in the stowed position. I have the proper amount of DOT reflective tape going 100% of my bumper, my DOT bumper. My plate is clean, current, and up to date. My light's in good condition. And my bumper is properly mounted and secure. Would you like to help me check my lights? And at that point, you are going to get into the cab, and the examiner will stand back here, and you are going to check your running lights by turning your headlights on. You're going to check your left and right turn signals, your 4-way flashers, your brake lights, and then you're also going to check your reverse light. So with the truck off, you will place the shifter in reverse, and as long as the key's on, the light will come on. Then the examiner will go to the front of the vehicle, and you will check the headlights, the left and right turn signals, and the 4-way flashers. And that will conclude your exterior pre-trip inspection.